At 0923 on the 14th of June 2025, USS Princeton was conducting a routine freedom of navigation patrol in the South China Sea when her SPY-1 radar lit up with a contact that came within inches of triggering World War III. 200 kilometers away, a Chinese Type 052D destroyer, call sign John Chong, had been loitering at 18 knots. Then, in under 90 seconds, she surged to 30 knots. Unbeknownst to the Americans, her captain had just received a direct order from Beijing: close the US warship and force it to turn away first. Beijing was about to receive a very expensive lesson in why picking a fight with the United States Navy on the open ocean is still a catastrophically bad idea. The Nimitz carrier strike group visible on the horizon had spent the last 75 years doing one thing better than anyone else: keeping the planet's most vital sea lanes open so Chinese factories could continue shipping cheap electronics to Best Buy. They were operating 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese territory, in international waters that handle $3.4 trillion in annual trade with metronomic reliability. The mission was textbook phone-op: predictable track, transparent intent, and the disciplined professionalism that separates a real Navy from a Coast Guard cosplay. 926. Target classification complete. Radar operators positively identified a Plan Type 052D destroyer. Threat level moderate to high. Inside Princeton CIC, the tactical action officer tracked the incoming vector with the quiet assurance of a man backed by 122 Mech 41 vertical launch cells loaded with enough ordnance to send any Chinese surface ship straight to the seabed. The SPY-1 painted the contact so cleanly you could count the rivets. At the destroyer's current speed, she would enter her own missile engagement envelope in exactly 17 minutes. Simple, brutal arithmetic. Chinese YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could close the remaining distance in under 4 minutes once fired. Princeton's SM-6 in surface attack mode could outrange them by nearly 240 nautical miles and swat them out of the sky like insects. 929. The captain asked for probable intent. The plot gave the answer instantly: weapons release range in 14 minutes. The TAO recommended general quarters. The captain's reply carried pure American confidence: let's see how far they're willing to humiliate themselves before reality intervenes, assuming they can even thread the needle through the merchant traffic unharmed. The South China Sea was crowded. 46 commercial ships inside 50 miles, including a Singapore-flagged container vessel packed with semiconductors and a $200 million South Korean LNG tanker. All of them sailed these waters only because the US Navy still guaranteed safe passage. Turning this ocean into Beijing's private lake would first require actually defeating the United States Navy in open battle, something that has literally never happened. And today was not going to be the day that changed. 0930. Princeton's cooperative engagement capability instantly pushed the threat track to every Aegis unit in the strike group. USS Nimitz, 104,600 tons of steel-backed American foreign policy carrying 90 of the planet's most lethal aircraft, adjusted flight deck operations with the effortless precision of a Swiss chronometer. Destroyers USS Changhoon and USS Kidd slid into new screening stations, forming a missile wall that would make any Chinese attack a one-way ticket to the seabed. 935. The situation escalated from tense to outright hostile. An E-2D Hawkeye orbiting at 25,000 feet with a 400 nautical mile God's eye view reported multiple air contacts launching from the Chinese carrier Shandong. Radar returns confirmed J-15 fighters climbing south, straining for altitude. Air controllers couldn't help but notice the irony. The flankers were visibly struggling to gain height, clearly throttled by fuel and payload restrictions imposed by the ski jump the plane loves to brag about. 60 seconds later, sonar teams delivered the punchline: a submerged contact bearing 080, range 80 nautical miles. Acoustic signature, unmistakably, a Type 039 diesel-electric boat. The funny part? It was making more noise than a freight train. Any professional submariner would have died of embarrassment. So this was Beijing's grand multi-domain intimidation package. 1990s vintage surface ships charging a lone carrier aircraft that can't carry a full warload because of a ski jump quiet submarines, so loud they might as well transmit their position on open AM radio textbook bullying. Loud, flashy, and only effective against opponents too weak or too frightened to hit back. Unfortunately for Beijing, they had just thrown down the gauntlet against the wrong navy in the wrong ocean. The United States Navy has been perfecting blue water supremacy since World War I, and this Chinese task force was about to receive an extremely expensive, extremely public reminder of exactly why the US Navy still reigns unchallenged. 0937. USS Nimitz's flight deck exploded into the kind of controlled chaos only American carriers have ever truly perfected. FA-18, E Super Hornets from VFA-14 top hatters roared off the catapults every 45 seconds in a symphony of steam, fire, and precision that China's ski jump carriers can only watch from afar and envy. Within minutes, the 1st Division was screaming through 15,000 feet, AN/APG-79 AESA radars, already illuminating the oncoming J-15S at extreme range. The mismatch was almost cruel. 1,200 transmit-receive modules per AP, G-79 tracking dozens of targets simultaneously, versus the J-15's old mechanical scan radar sweeping back and forth like a lighthouse, screaming its own position to the world. The flankers were clawing for altitude, a painful reminder of Shandong's ski jump curse. Light fuel, light weapons, or stay on deck. They were burning gas at a brutal rate, just trying to gain energy the Super Hornets were handed at launch. The Americans, catapulted at full combat weight, carried extra fuel. Every FA-18 was fused by Link 16. When one radar saw a target, the entire formation saw it in real time. The Chinese pilots were stuck with individual sensors and voice calls, essentially fighting networked warfare while wearing blindfolds. The technology gulf wasn't years, it was decades. Then the EA-18G Growlers arrived and never had to fire a shot. Carrying ALQ-99 jamming pods, they slid into orbit and began cooking Chinese electronics from over 100 miles away. Chinese scopes bloomed with ghost contacts. 4 American jets became 12, then 20. Radar locks shattered and reformed like broken glass. J-15 pilots suddenly found themselves chasing phantoms while the real threats manoeuvred unseen. The Super Hornets executed the classic wall formation honed over decades. High cap at 35,000 feet, medium at 25,000 feet, low at 15,000 feet, overlapping missile engagement zones, perfect mutual support, and 0 safe corridors for the Chinese fighters to fly through without stepping into someone's kill box. It wasn't a fight yet. It was a masterclass. The Americans had the Chinese force in a triple bind. The Chinese formation, meanwhile, stayed tightly clustered. Unavoidable when your data links can't support dispersed tactics. They were forced to rely on visual contact for coordination, which made their moves predictable and exposed. Their J-15 might look formidable on propaganda posters, but in real combat they were flying relics against opponents using 21st century methods. At 0943, the RC-135B rivet joint delivered vital intelligence. The ungainly Boeing 707-based aircraft had been circling for 6 hours, its electronic sensors logging every Chinese transmission. The Mandarin linguists on board were practically enjoying themselves. Darkstar confirms Chinese pilots requesting authorization for aggressive maneuvers. Repeating, they're asking permission to buzz our ships. The Chinese were escalating, but only after seeking approval. American pilots, trained to act decisively, found it amusing. By the time Beijing granted permission, the tactical picture would have shifted multiple times. Meanwhile, the Princeton's defensive systems monitored each threat with cold precision. Her SPY radar, able to track baseball-sized targets more than 165 miles away, rendered the Chinese destroyer as obvious as a barn door. Fire control solutions were constantly refreshed, and it was beginning to look like they might actually be needed. At 0947, the Jonang crossed a line that would have prompted instant retaliation from almost any other navy. Its Type 346A phased array radar ceased scanning and locked onto the USS Nimitz with fire control grade tracking. In naval terms, this is the step right before launching missiles, the electromagnetic equivalent of aiming a loaded weapon at someone. Inside the Princeton's CIC, the reaction was swift but disciplined. Endless drills ensured American composure. The Chinese were gambling that US restraint meant hesitation. They were about to learn that restraint is not the same as weakness. The Princeton kept her own fire control radars on standby, but her 122 vertical launch cells held more than enough power to send the John Chong to the bottom within seconds. The Princeton carried SM-6 missiles with a 240-kilometer reach, along with SM-2s configured for surface engagements, all capable of turning the enemy ship into the region's newest artificial reef. Every firing solution was being updated in real time. The Chinese destroyer was exposed to multiple threat systems from multiple vectors, with effectively zero chance of survival if the confrontation escalated. The fire control lock remained active for exactly 30 seconds, just long enough for the Chinese to claim they could have attacked, but not long enough to trigger American automatic self-defense. It was staged aggression, but directed at the wrong navy. Meanwhile, the Princeton's crew recorded every detail: timestamps, emission profiles, bearings, data that would prove invaluable in an actual shooting war. Even after the Chinese destroyer stopped its illumination, the incident was far from finished. In the air, a J-15 pilot decided to show off, peeling away from formation and diving toward an F-18 in what aviators call a thump, an intimidating close-quarters pass. The American, a Top Gun trained pilot who handled such antics as routine, simply rolled inverted and maneuvered into the Chinese fighter's 6 o'clock position. For 3 full seconds, he held a flawless firing solution. His helmet-mounted display showed the J-15's engines burning bright in infrared. One pull of the trigger would have sent an AM-9X Sidewinder straight up the jet's tailpipe. He didn't pull it. Professional discipline held, and the moment slipped by. But the Chinese still had one more escalation in store. The situation reached its peak when the submarine made its move. The Type 039 diesel-electric boat had been creeping closer, using the thermal layer to hide. At 0951, it made a crucial mistake. It raised its snorkel to recharge its batteries. Tau. Sonar detects subsurface contact bearing 159, range 15,000 yards. Contact is snorkeling. Classified probable Type 039. Noise levels comparable to a freight train. The submarine captain either didn't realise or didn't care that the Princeton's SQQ-89 sonar suite had been tracking him for the past hour. The ship had his acoustic signature logged and his position nailed down to within meters. Had things gone kinetic, he would have had roughly 12 seconds to rethink his choices before an ASROC turned his boat into fish food. The tactical scenario had become a perfect example of how not to execute naval operations. Chinese forces had boxed themselves in. A carrier to the northwest, a destroyer to the west, and a submarine to the southwest. If weapons were fired, none of them would last 5 minutes, and the Americans were ready to demonstrate exactly how that would unfold. At 14:30 hours, the USS Nimitz launched everything capable of flight. 48 aircraft thundered off the deck in the largest single carrier show of force in years. Super Hornets armed with live ordnance. EA-18 G Growlers carrying electronic attack suites powerful enough to black out a city. E-2D Hawkeyes taking control of the electromagnetic high ground. The afternoon sky darkened under the mass of American aircraft. The Growlers were the first to engage. With their ALQ-99 pods running at maximum output, they transformed Chinese radar displays into abstract artwork. Hundreds of phantom contacts appeared out of nowhere, while genuine aircraft disappeared into a storm of electronic interference. The Shandong's air defense picture looked as if someone had splattered paint across the screens. Chinese controllers were unable to separate real threats from illusions. To them, Everything looked hostile. Next came the submarine, a Virginia-class attack boat that had been trailing the Chinese formation for 8 days. Silent, hidden, patient. At 15:47, she surfaced just 6 nautical miles from the Shandong, close enough for Chinese lookouts to spot her dark hull with the naked eye. The psychological shock was enormous. 8 days of undetected shadowing, during which their entire anti-submarine network, helicopters, sonar buoys, and hull-mounted sonar had failed to detect the 7,900-ton American submarine. In wartime, their carrier would have already been gone. The sub's commanding officer ordered the emergency surface purely for psychological effect. She shot upward through the water like a breaching whale, seawater streaming off her hull in the afternoon light. Chinese photographers had unobstructed, high-resolution proof of American undersea supremacy. After roughly 90 seconds, long enough to be seen, photographed and reported, she slipped back beneath the surface. The message could not have been clearer. We control the undersea battle space. Meanwhile, in the sky, American fighters displayed textbook ACM, air combat maneuvering, at the expense of increasingly overwhelmed Chinese pilots. The J-15s, already low on fuel after their ski jump takeoffs and steep climbs, simply couldn't keep up. In engagement after engagement, the result was identical. US fighters in perfect firing position, Chinese fighters defensive and burning their remaining fuel reserves. One by one, the J-15S broke off and limped back toward the Shandong, tanks nearly dry. Their combat endurance had been drained trying and failing to match American performance. Several aircraft likely landed on emergency fuel, some pilots seeing the bingo warning light they'd only encountered in simulators. By 1623, the Shandong's carrier strike group began retreating. Official Chinese statements claimed the completion of scheduled exercises, but no one believed it. They had arrived intending to project Chinese naval strength, to intimidate lawful transit, to assert control over waters that were not theirs. Instead, they received a clear demonstration of why the South China Sea is often called America's 6th Great Lake. See you in the next one.